They didn't ask, they demanded. Step aside. This cabin's not for you. Her boarding pass was scanned, paid in full, her name on the manifest. But none of that mattered. Not when her skin was black, her posture confident, and her silence louder than their prejudice. A man sneered as she reached for the overhead bin. Miss, economy's that way. The flight attendant didn't stop him. She backed him up. They humiliated her in front of a full cabin, and they thought they'd get away with it. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that she wasn't just another passenger. She was the last person in the world they should have picked a fight with. This is where it begins. A series about power, perception, and the brutal cost of quiet injustice. When someone is disrespected not because of who they are, but because of what others refuse to see. Where are you watching from? What would you have done in that moment? Drop it in the comments, hit like, and subscribe, because the twist you think is coming? It's nothing compared to what's next. Olivia Brooks wasn't new to airports, nor was she new to the cautious stares that came with being a black woman in places people didn't expect her to be. That morning at JFK, nothing about her demeanor suggested she was out of place. Her tailored navy pantsuit was pressed to perfection, her gait composed, her boarding pass already scanned and tucked neatly into her phone case. The international terminal buzzed with its usual controlled chaos. Flight announcements in multiple languages, the hum of luxury luggage wheels, the polite clatter of designer shoes across marble floors. Olivia moved through it all with practiced ease, as if she had done this 100 times, which in truth she had. Paris wasn't a vacation for her. It was a recalibration, a short, earned pause between high-stakes negotiations and mergers she helped orchestrate from behind the tinted glass of boardrooms most people would never even see. As she stepped onto the Skylux aircraft and into the first-class cabin, the shift was subtle but immediate. Eyes flicked up from newspapers and champagne flutes. Gazes hovered a second too long before returning to devices, and for a moment, even the ambient lighting seemed to dim under the weight of silent judgment. Olivia was used to that too. But what she didn't expect was the flight attendant intercepting her halfway down the aisle. "Ma'am, may I see your boarding pass?" the woman asked with a bright, forced smile. Her name tag read Claire. Her tone didn't match the warmth in her voice. Olivia blinked, pausing mid-step. Around her, other passengers strolled past uninterrupted, unbothered. No one else had been asked to confirm anything. "Sure," Olivia said evenly, fishing the pass from her phone case and handing it over. Claire scanned it quickly, the smile thinning when she saw the seat. To a window suite up front. "Thank you," Claire replied, stepping aside with a nod that felt reluctant. Olivia gave a polite smile in return, then continued forward, heels clicking softly on the aisle's carpeted path. She reached her seat and began placing her bag in the overhead compartment when a voice spoke, uninvited, from behind. "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong cabin." Olivia turned. The speaker was a man in his 60s, heavy-set, red tie loose against his neck, and a look of smug certainty plastered across his face. "This is first class," he added with a small laugh, as though he thought she'd made a genuine mistake. Olivia didn't respond immediately. She simply looked at him, letting the silence speak. Then she nodded once, polite, firm, and said, "Yes, I know." She turned back to her luggage, slid it into place, and sat down. The man lingered for a moment, clearly thrown off by her refusal to play into his narrative, before mumbling something under his breath and moving to his own seat 2 rows back. Olivia kept her expression neutral, her spine straight, but inside, the familiar ache of exhaustion settled in her chest, not from travel, but from performance. From having to prove, again and again, that she belonged. Minutes passed. A glass of champagne was offered to the man beside her, an aging venture capitalist type in khaki slacks and Bluetooth earbuds, but none was extended to Olivia. Claire passed by without a word. When another attendant did bring a tray, she hesitated at Olivia's row, as if double-checking her presence again, before finally handing over the flute. Olivia accepted it without comment, even as her seatmate glanced sideways, pretending not to stare. From her window, she watched the ground crew move around the aircraft, small orange vests darting like chess pieces beneath the plane's shadow. She focused on her breath. Inhale, exhale. In a few hours, the world would tilt back in her favor. But for now, here in this cabin of glass smiles and velvet prejudice, she would wait. The plane had barely begun to taxi when Olivia reached for the touchscreen beside her seat, intent on pulling up the in-flight Wi-Fi login and settling into a curated playlist that might distract her from the weight of the earlier exchange. But as the screen lit up and the passenger manifest flashed briefly in the top right corner, part of a new Skylux security interface meant to verify seating assignments and ensure luxury consistency, as their advertising called it, her breath caught. Her name wasn't there. Where Olivia Brooks should have been, the screen showed a completely different name, Catherine Donaldson. Confused, Olivia tapped through the menu, bringing up the passenger list again, then the seating chart. Her own name was nowhere to be found in first class. Her seat, 2A, was labeled under the alias Donaldson, while Olivia Brooks had been assigned to a middle seat in 18C in economy. The irony hit instantly, bitter and sharp. The system had quite literally moved her to the back of the plane, regardless of what her physical presence, her printed boarding pass, and her paid confirmation all said. A few seconds later, Claire reappeared, that same tight smile already beginning to strain at the corners. Yes, Ms. Brooks. Olivia turned the screen toward her. My name isn't on the manifest. I'm being listed in seat 18C. Claire's eyes flicked to the screen, then back to Olivia. She hesitated, then gave a dismissive shrug. That's just a minor display error. It happens sometimes. You're fine where you are. But her tone was thinly veiled discomfort, and Olivia caught the way she avoided full eye contact. A display error that only applies to me? Olivia asked, her voice low, calm, but sharpened like a scalpel. Claire drew a slow breath. Like I said, it's not a big deal. Let me check with the crew. Then, without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked away. Meanwhile, across the aisle and 2 rows back, a passenger, early 30s, hoodie pulled over his head, phone angled discreetly in his lap, had already begun recording. His lens followed Olivia's interaction with Claire like a hawk trailing prey. The live stream picked up muffled fragments of conversation, and within seconds, he was narrating softly to his unseen audience. Look, y'all, homegirl's in first class, but now she's saying the system got her name wrong. I swear, every flight now got a drama episode. I think this is one of those Karen in reverse moments. Olivia wasn't aware she was already going viral. She only knew the air in the cabin had grown thinner, as if someone had slowly turned the oxygen down a notch. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, her breathing slow, her composure held like a dam under pressure. Every muscle in her body remained controlled, even as her instincts screamed. She knew what was happening. First, the side glances. Then, the misnamed manifest. Now, the passive brushing off of her concerns. One step at a time, she was being nudged toward the door without anyone needing to actually say the words. 10 minutes passed before Claire returned. Now joined by a male flight supervisor, mid-40s, silver-rimmed glasses, the kind of smile that had been trained into submission by years of policy meetings. Ms. Brooks, he began, I understand there's some concern about your seating record. Olivia turned to him. There's no concern. There's a system error showing I'm not supposed to be here, despite everything proving otherwise. The supervisor nodded as if agreeing, but his next words betrayed that illusion. We just want to ensure you're comfortable. If you prefer, we can escort you to 18C, where the manifest currently places your name, just as a precaution until we get the system updated. That was it. The moment they tried to nudge her backward, figuratively and literally, with a veneer of just trying to help. Olivia leaned slightly forward. So let me get this straight. Your solution to a glitch is to pretend I didn't pay for this seat, didn't check in, didn't get assigned here with a confirmed boarding pass, and move me to the back of the plane? For optics. The man hesitated. Behind him, Claire's jaw tightened. No, not at all, he offered. It's about order, Ms. Brooks. Just for now. Olivia didn't smile. Then order better, she replied coldly. What had started as a simple system error was now mutating, quietly and efficiently, into something far more calculated. Olivia knew the pattern by heart. First, they questioned your presence. Then, they undermined your legitimacy. The next step? Escalation, never loud, never obvious, always wrapped in procedure. So when the man in the navy blue security blazer entered the cabin mid-boarding, Olivia didn't flinch. He had that heavy, purposeful walk security agents adopted when they were about to do something they had no intention of explaining. His badge gleamed beneath the embroidered words Port Authority Aviation Division. His eyes scanned the rows, and he made a beeline for her. He didn't smile. He didn't introduce himself. He simply leaned in and asked flatly, "Ma'am, may I see a second form of identification?" Olivia looked up at him, her face composed, her fingers still resting lightly on the armrest. "Is there a reason?" she asked, matching his tone in quiet resolve. The man's gaze didn't waver. "We've been alerted to a discrepancy involving your boarding record. It's standard protocol to confirm identity in situations like these." The lie was clean, practiced, measured in every syllable. Olivia reached into her purse and handed over her passport without a word. He took it, studied the name, glanced at her face like he was squinting for something that wasn't there. "Do you have any proof of purchase for your ticket?" he added. Olivia blinked once, then slowly pulled up the Skylux app on her phone, her thumb navigating to the reservation. Olivia Brooks, Seat 2A confirmed. She held it out to him. He barely looked. "I'll be right back," he said, and walked away without returning her passport. Passengers watched now, no longer bothering to hide their curiosity. The man in khakis from earlier smirked behind his tablet, as if everything he suspected had just been confirmed. A few seats behind Olivia, a middle-aged couple exchanged whispers, the woman mouthing words like scam and fraud behind a manicured hand. The pressure was building, but not in Olivia's voice or her body. No, she sat still, spine tall, breath slow, her mind working 2 moves ahead. If they wanted to turn this into a game of public optics, they'd soon regret underestimating the kind of image she could project. Meanwhile, at the front of the cabin, a different scene was unfolding. The same Claire who had questioned Olivia twice now stood at the cockpit entrance, smiling wide as she gestured for a group of white passengers, 3 men and 1 woman, all in tailored coats and diamond-studded watches, to approach the flight deck. "Captain Michaels is happy to welcome our VIPs for a quick tour before takeoff," Claire chirped, eyes glowing with enthusiasm. Laughter echoed softly from the front as they posed for photos with the pilots, hands resting casually on shoulders, champagne flutes clinking just outside the cockpit door. Olivia noticed it all. Not once had anyone asked her if she'd like to meet the captain. Not once had the word VIP been used in her direction, even though her net worth could likely outpace the entire group at the front of the cabin combined. Her presence wasn't questioned because she wasn't dressed well, or because she lacked composure. It was questioned because people like her were still viewed as exceptional only when publicly validated. And a quiet black woman with her own seat, her own wealth, and her own calm didn't make sense to people who had built their entire identity on being the default. 10 minutes later, the security agent returned, his face a mask of neutrality. "Everything checks out," he said, handing back the passport like it had personally offended him. "You're free to remain in your seat." Olivia took it silently. No apology followed, no explanation, just the soft shuffle of his shoes disappearing down the aisle and the cold weight of authority left behind. The passengers who had been watching turned away now, back into their bubbles of ignorance, pretending they hadn't just witnessed an attempted erasure. The man in khakis met her gaze briefly, then looked down at his phone. He didn't smile this time. Claire passed through once more to offer towels and warm nuts to the VIP group now returned from their cockpit tour. She bypassed Olivia's row entirely. Though the security officer had returned her passport and confirmed her right to be in Seat 2A, the atmosphere around her hadn't relaxed. If anything, it had calcified into something more dangerous. Silent consensus. No one apologized. No one corrected the error. The damage wasn't procedural, it was social and intentional. From a corner of her eye, Olivia noticed Claire approach again, this time accompanied by another uniformed crew member Olivia hadn't seen before. His expression was blank, protocol frozen into his brow. "Ms. Brooks," Claire began, voice stiff and a shade too loud, "we're going to need you to collect your belongings and deplane while we finalize a few last-minute confirmations." Olivia didn't move. "I've already been confirmed, twice. By security. By you." Claire's smile twitched, faltering under pressure. "We understand that, but we've received a directive to reprocess your boarding documentation." The phrase hung in the air like smoke. Directive, reprocess. Words engineered to sound official, but mean absolutely nothing. A voice 2 rows behind muttered, "Here we go again." Another snorted softly. Olivia could feel the shift, the subtle rise in energy that came when an audience realized they were about to be entertained at someone else's expense. She remained seated. "And if I refuse?" she asked evenly. Claire's tone hardened. "Then we'll be forced to involve terminal security. You can either come voluntarily, or..." The rest of the sentence didn't need to be said. Olivia took a slow breath. She'd spent her career advocating for negotiation, not spectacle. But this wasn't a boardroom. This was theater now. Carefully, deliberately, she reached for her leather tote, rose to her feet, and stepped out into the aisle. Silence followed her like a shadow. Every pair of eyes, in first class, turned. Some widened in smug satisfaction. Others narrowed in disapproval. One or two, perhaps, flickered with shame. But none spoke up. As she walked toward the exit, a man in business casual pulled out his phone and started filming. His camera followed her progress like she was a perp walk on Wall Street. Olivia kept her shoulders squared. She wouldn't give them what they wanted. But that didn't stop them from trying. As she reached the jet bridge, another man mid-20s, with slicked back hair and the obnoxious energy of a failed influencer, stepped directly into her path. Phone already recording. Smile wide. "Hey, quick question," he said, laughing under his breath. "How does it feel to be kicked off a flight you couldn't afford?" His voice rang with mock innocence, but the malice was clear. This one of those equal access lawsuits waiting to happen, or just a misunderstanding? Olivia stopped just short of him, met his gaze for one long, pointed second, then turned and kept walking without saying a word. Behind her, he chuckled louder, speaking into the lens like a tabloid reporter. "No comment, folks. That's the silence of someone who knows they got caught pretending to be someone they're not." His voice faded as she stepped into the hallway, but the damage was done. The clip would be edited, posted, dissected, and devoured by morning. Out of context, devoid of truth, and designed to humiliate. It wasn't about what she'd said. It was about how they could twist her silence into guilt. Outside the aircraft, a junior gate agent stood waiting beside a Skylux representative holding a tablet and trying not to make eye contact. "Ms. Brooks," he said, voice rehearsed and falsely apologetic. "We're reviewing a few things internally. If you'd kindly wait in the boarding area, we'll issue an update shortly." Olivia stared at him, her expression unreadable. "Am I being removed for any confirmed infraction?" she asked. The man hesitated. "No, ma'am, just a technicality. So this is a delay, based on inconvenience." He smiled as if that would smooth the blade. "It's just procedure." Olivia's silence cut deeper than anything she could have said. And now, here she was, seated in a quiet, glass-encased section of the terminal, surrounded by nothing but silence and the dull ache of clarity. Her phone sat in her lap, screen dark, unread messages accumulating from her assistant, her legal counsel, and her executive director, none of which she had responded to yet. She stared through the terminal window at the aircraft she had just been removed from. It was still parked at the gate, its jet bridge reconnected, a crew member walking hurriedly toward the cockpit. Something wasn't right. Inside the cabin, a different kind of tension had taken hold. The flight, which had been cleared for pushback, had suddenly halted just as the wheels began to turn. The engine spooled down. Overhead lights flickered once, and then a chime rang through the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." A voice came over the intercom, calm but clipped. "We've encountered a minor systems issue, and will be holding here at the gate while our ground crew investigates. We appreciate your patience." Passengers groaned, some sighing loudly, others rolling their eyes. Champagne glasses clinked. Phones came out. But in row 3A, a man with silver hair and a navy pinstripe suit leaned forward slowly, squinting out the window at the woman now sitting behind the glass in the terminal. He elbowed the man next to him, a fellow gray-templed businessman with a Wall Street Journal folded under his arm. "Frank," he muttered, "you see that woman sitting in the lounge?" Frank glanced out the window, followed the man's gaze, and gave a nonchalant shrug. "Yeah, what about her?" The first man frowned, tapping his temple with 2 fingers. "I've seen her before. Couple years back, I think. San Diego. The International CEO Summit. You remember the one where they had that keynote on cybersecurity and infrastructure collapse?" Frank nodded slowly. "Yeah, I was there." The man leaned closer, voice low. "She was one of the panelists. Olivia Brooks, founder of PulseCore Ventures. She built the damn thing from scratch after leaving Langford Capital." Frank blinked. "PulseCore? That's the firm that just closed the data contract with Homeland." The first man nodded. "And with Lockridge Defense. You think she's flying commercial for fun?" Frank looked again at the figure in the lounge, posture composed, face unreadable. His mouth parted slightly. "Oh hell." Back in the cabin, murmurs began to spread like wildfire. "The system glitch?" someone whispered. "I heard it's about the manifest. They're reviewing security protocols now. You know they made that woman leave, right? The one who was sitting in 2A? They just pulled her off the plane with no explanation. I heard she didn't belong here. Nah, someone said she's actually the owner of a cybersecurity firm." Wait, was that Olivia Brooks? At the front of the plane, Claire stood frozen as the pilot stepped out from the cockpit, face tight. "We've just been contacted by the airline's compliance team," he said, voice low. "Apparently, there's been a request to review passenger handling on this flight. Immediately." Claire stiffened. "Captain." "I followed standard procedure." The captain didn't blink. Apparently not. He turned to the co-pilot. "Hold boarding. This plane isn't going anywhere until we get a resolution." The co-pilot picked up the radio, relaying instructions to the tarmac. The sound of latches unlocking and hydraulics hissing followed as the boarding door reopened once more. Outside the aircraft, Olivia still hadn't moved. She saw the bridge reconnecting and raised a single eyebrow. Nothing more. The gate agent reappeared beside her, pale and visibly nervous now. "Ms. Brooks, there may have been an error in judgment. Our compliance department has requested a follow-up. Would you mind stepping back aboard for a few minutes?" Olivia didn't speak. She simply rose, smoothed her blazer, and followed him with the kind of quiet grace that made noise without sound. It was subtle, not loud or chaotic, but it carried weight. Conversations quieted. Expressions shifted. Even Claire, who had carried herself with brittle confidence earlier, visibly tensed as Olivia approached her row. The man in 3A whispered to Frank again, his voice a low threat of awe. "She's back on. I knew it. We're about to see some real turbulence, but not the kind you feel at 30,000 feet." Claire took a single step toward Olivia, her voice forced into something diplomatic. "Ms. Brooks, we'd be happy to reseat you if you'd prefer a more private cabin," or Olivia cut her off with a simple, unwavering look. "I'll return to 2A." Her tone wasn't hostile. It was precise, clean like steel. Claire nodded quickly, stepping aside as Olivia slid smoothly into her seat and placed her bag beneath the console. She didn't have to reclaim her position. Her very presence did that for her. A few rows back, in the service alcove behind the first-class galley, Grace, the youngest flight attendant on board, stood rigid beside Claire, her voice hushed but urgent. "Are we sure this is the same Olivia Brooks from PulseCore?" Claire gave her a sharp glance, annoyed but uncertain. "It doesn't matter who she is," Claire muttered, but the confidence from earlier had drained from her words. Grace hesitated, her brows drawn together in something more than just concern. "It kind of does," she said quietly. "I mean, that's a billion-dollar firm. She's been in Forbes. She was just on a panel with Treasury last month. I saw the video." Claire didn't reply. She straightened her blouse and turned away, but the nervous shift in her posture betrayed everything. Power dynamics were changing, and she knew it. Meanwhile, the man in seat 2B, white early 40s, clean-shaven, with a discreet monogram on his dress shirt cuff, was already back in work mode, laptop unfolded, fingers gliding across the trackpad. He had said nothing when Olivia returned, just offered a tight nod, but as his screen lit up, his brow furrowed almost instantly. He stared at the presentation slide on his screen, an internal report from a cybersecurity briefing, then looked again, closer. At the top corner of the slide was a logo, sleek, minimalist, electric blue. Pulse Core Ventures. His eyes darted to Olivia, then back to the screen. He clicked through to another slide, one that quoted a direct remark. Brooks recommends phased deployment of advanced behavioral encryption by Q4. The quote was time-stamped. It was hers. The man sat back, blinking slowly. He was preparing a strategy proposal built on the technological infrastructure of the woman sitting right next to him. A bead of sweat formed near his temple. He shifted in his seat, opened his mouth slightly as if to speak, then thought better of it and quietly closed his laptop instead. Olivia didn't react. She had seen the screen. She had also seen the flicker of embarrassment crawl across his face. But she offered nothing, not a smirk, not a nod. She just kept her gaze forward, fingers calmly adjusting the angle of the reading light above her. Across the aisle, whispers had begun to stir again. This time, they weren't mocking. They were curious, even reverent. Did you hear? She's the founder of Pulse Core, the one they made leave earlier. You're kidding. No. Someone up front just Googled her. It's all real. Wait, that's why the pilot delayed the flight. She's not just a CEO. She's the CEO. Grace returned to her station, biting her lip. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured mineral water into crystal tumblers. They're all talking, she whispered to another junior attendant. They know who she is now. The other woman looked toward the front, where Olivia sat composed and unreadable. What's Claire going to do? Grace shook her head. Nothing. It's too late for Claire. She could feel the glances brushing against her skin like static. Whispers circulated like wind currents. Her name, her real name, was now being spoken in hushed tones instead of being omitted, erased, or questioned. People had started to understand who she was. But knowing was one thing, witnessing was another. And that was precisely what they were about to do. Just as the captain re-entered the cockpit to prepare for relaunch, a sudden knock came at the still-open cabin door. Claire turned toward it, confusion momentarily crossing her face. At the threshold stood a sharply dressed woman in a fitted black suit, tablet in hand, flanked by two men in tailored gray, tall, square-shouldered, earpieces in place, moving with the effortless discipline of executive security. The woman in black leaned forward and spoke to the gate agent in a clipped tone. We're here for MS. Olivia Brooks. The gate agent blinked, stunned. Claire's mouth parted as she took a small step forward, then immediately froze as she saw Olivia rise slowly from her seat. Without speaking, Olivia gathered her things and walked toward the door with the kind of ease that didn't demand attention. It commanded it. The security men stepped aside respectfully, and the woman with the tablet gave a firm nod. Everything's ready, ma'am. Olivia turned to face the passengers, the crew, the captain now emerging again, and most of all, Claire, who stood frozen, hands clenched together in front of her like a schoolgirl who had just realized she'd failed the final exam of her life. Olivia's voice was low, clear, deliberate. Before we proceed, I believe a clarification is in order. She took one step forward. Every head turned toward her. Even those in the back rows had craned their necks into the aisle. My name is Olivia Brooks, she said, eyes sweeping the cabin. I am the founder and CEO of Pulse Core Ventures. And as of 9 o'clock this morning, Pulse Core finalized acquisition of a controlling 51% stake in Skylux Airlines, including this aircraft, its flight operations, and the employment contracts of every person on board. A silence fell so deep it was physical. The man in 3A exhaled loudly. The younger executive with the laptop audibly gasped. Grace stood in the galley, lips parted, hand covering her mouth. Claire didn't speak, didn't blink. her eyes wide and glassy, as if they'd been erased. Olivia didn't stop. This flight and its handling of me will be audited. Every decision made by this crew, from boarding to deboarding, has been recorded and filed. Your systems, your staffing, your code of conduct, all of it will be reviewed against the standard you promised to your shareholders, and more importantly, to your passengers. Her gaze landed briefly on the man with the camera phone, now holding it limply at his side, suddenly aware of the gravity of the moment he had tried to turn into a joke. Let me be clear, Olivia continued. I did not come here to make a scene. I came here to travel. What followed was not a misunderstanding. It was a systemic failure, one that ends today. The passengers sat stiffly in their plush seats, the once vibrant buzz of privilege and routine now replaced by a collective awareness that something irreversible had just unfolded. Claire still hadn't moved. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched the side of the beverage cart, knuckles paling. Grace stood behind her, no longer trying to conceal the nervous glances she sent down the aisle, while the younger attendant near the galley leaned close to whisper, "Did she really say she owns the airline?" Grace didn't respond. She just nodded once, her lips pressed into a thin line of disbelief. Meanwhile, the captain had already picked up the satellite phone, speaking quietly with someone beyond the confines of the cockpit, his voice taut but deferential. He knew who held command now. 2 minutes later, Olivia reappeared. She walked with even more precision than before, flanked by her executive assistant, Elena, mid-30s, in a charcoal gray sheath dress with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm, and one of the 2 security staff, who stayed a step behind her, silent but present. She paused near the cockpit entrance. "Captain," she said clearly, "please delay departure until further notice. This aircraft is no longer cleared for takeoff under internal compliance review." The captain, still holding the receiver to his ear, gave a quick nod. "Understood, MS. Brooks." She didn't smile. She turned toward the cabin and spoke in a tone measured not by emotion, but by finality. "Elena, begin verification." Elena opened her portfolio and pulled out a folded document, printed and tabbed. "Effective immediately," she announced. Addressing the front crew station, Skylux Internal Oversight, under the direction of Pulse Core Ventures, is commencing a crew audit on Flight 217. All personnel, please remain at your assigned posts. This process is non-negotiable. Her voice rang clear, unaffected by the tension that gripped the cabin like turbulence that couldn't be seen on radar. Claire instinctively stepped forward, her voice catching. No one told us this was happening today." Olivia turned to her with surgical calm. "No one needed to. We were observing behavior. The decision to activate this review was made an hour ago, based entirely on the conduct I personally experienced." Claire opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Olivia held her gaze only long enough to make it clear the conversation was over before it began. Across the aisle, murmurs began again, but now they carried a new tone. Less gossip, more awe. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching what looked like the unraveling of power in real time. At 3A, the older businessman leaned toward his colleague. "I don't think she's just here to fly," he whispered. "She's making an example." And Olivia wasn't finished. She walked calmly to the galley, where 2 flight crew members stood frozen. She scanned their name tags without waiting for permission. Then she turned back toward Elena. "Please notify legal to terminate all ongoing procurement negotiations with Eastgate Logistics Group." Elena blinked, but didn't question her. She made the call instantly. Claire's head shot up at the mention, the name clearly triggering something. Her lips parted as if to protest, but she hesitated, visibly wrestling with something deeper than shock. Olivia saw it. "I believe," she said, her voice quieter now, but no less sharp, "that Eastgate Logistics was expecting to sign a $400 million contract with Skylux in 2 days' time. That contract was contingent upon a number of factors, including a certain internal referral from a member of this flight crew." Claire's face turned pale. The heat of realization spread across her skin like fire. Passengers had stopped pretending not to watch. Every head was turned now. One man started recording, not with mockery this time, but reverence, like he was witnessing something historic. "She's killing the contract," someone whispered. "That's 400 million. "She's cutting ties with Claire's guy," another voice added. "Her boyfriend's on Eastgate's board. I heard her brag about it earlier." The live stream footage from earlier, once dismissed as just another anonymous clip meant to mock a black woman for causing a scene, had already been unearthed, reframed, and distributed by digital watchdogs, activists, journalists, and thousands of furious viewers who recognized what the crew had failed to. Olivia Brooks wasn't a nuisance. She was the story, edited side by side with her on-record Forbes interview, where she calmly discussed ethical leadership and corporate transparency. The clip now carried a devastating new caption: "This is how you treat the woman who owns the airline." Within minutes, the hashtag #SkyluxExposed surged to the top 10 on X and TikTok. Comment threads flooded with outrage, and demands for accountability began pouring in from all corners of the world: business leaders, equity advocates, even major Skylux shareholders themselves. Inside the cabin, the captain had just received a second call, this time not from operations, but directly from Skylux's board liaison. His face grew stiff, his eyes scanning the closed cockpit door as though it were made of glass. He emerged calmly, but his stride had changed. He approached Olivia, who stood quietly near the galley, reviewing the audit documentation Elena was compiling. "Ms. Brooks," he said, his voice lower now, more measured. "The board has confirmed your authority in this matter. You have full discretion on personnel suspension pending formal investigation." Olivia didn't look up from the page she was signing. "Good," she said. "Begin with the crew members listed here." She handed over the printed sheet, already bearing her signature. Names were clearly marked: Claire Hastings, lead flight attendant; Marcus Lindell, secondary cabin support; Trent Monroe, passenger relations supervisor, each accompanied by a description of conduct: repeated denial of verified identification, public humiliation of passenger without cause, failure to correct manifest error, willful neglect of duty to de-escalate. Word spread through the crew like a contagion. Trent, who had been pacing by the service station, stopped mid-step when he saw the captain hand Claire the suspension notice. She read it in silence, her face slowly draining of color as the reality settled in. Grace stood nearby, silent but watching. Claire turned to her instinctively, searching for support, but found none. Grace's eyes didn't offer pity, only distance. Outside the aircraft, reporters had already started gathering near Skylux's main terminal entrance. Someone from the comms team, likely tipped off by internal leaks, had already contacted the press. Now they couldn't stop the bleeding. Financial analysts, catching wind of the scandal's momentum, began circulating early projections. A 6% dip in Skylux stock within the first hour, then 9%, then 13% before close of market. By evening, major outlets were broadcasting live. Breaking: Skylux Airlines faces discrimination scandal after CEO Olivia Brooks removed from own plane. The footage spoke for itself. So did the numbers. International investors began pulling inquiries. Legal firms drafted statements. And the compliance division issued a formal announcement of review, citing potential violations of FAA policy, racial bias protocols, and consumer protection laws. Back inside the plane, Olivia finally took her seat again, not because she needed to prove anything, but because it was hers. No one dared speak as she adjusted her seatbelt. Elena returned to her side and whispered, "Media wants a statement." Olivia nodded once. "They'll get one after this flight arrives. On my terms." She looked out the window calmly, as if the entire storm outside were nothing more than distant weather. Claire sat near the rear of the aircraft now, no longer in uniform, stripped of her badge, her ID clipped face down on her lap. She stared blankly ahead, lips parted, the weight of her downfall crashing in waves she couldn't stop. She had built her identity on order, on control, on the hierarchy of hospitality, but that hierarchy had cracked, and the person she dismissed had stepped through it without breaking stride. By the time the engines roared to life again and the plane finally taxied from the gate, the cabin was not the same. The silence that had once been shaped by judgment and hierarchy was now shaped by reverence and reflection. Olivia sat motionless in 2A, her posture relaxed but not detached, her presence still commanding but absent of vindictiveness. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made threats. She had simply acted, and in doing so, she had dismantled an entire narrative. While the cabin climbed toward cruising altitude, Grace lingered in the galley, her hands fidgeting with a folded linen napkin. Her breath caught in her throat every time she glanced down the aisle. Finally, after an internal battle that had been building since Olivia's first steps onto the plane, she set the napkin down, straightened her spine, and walked slowly to the front. When she reached Olivia's row, she paused, throat tight, face pale with shame. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly. Olivia turned her gaze toward her, neutral but present. Grace swallowed. "I didn't say anything earlier. I should have. I saw how they treated you, and I froze. I was scared. Of Claire. Of losing my job. But that's not an excuse. It was wrong." Her voice cracked slightly. "And I'm sorry." Olivia watched her in silence for a long moment, then nodded once, slowly. "Don't apologize to me," she said gently. "Apologize to the next person by standing up for them when it counts." Grace's eyes welled. She nodded quickly, then stepped away, holding her breath as if afraid that even kindness might snap under pressure. Later that month, as headlines evolved from scandal to system-wide introspection, a clip from a modest podcast began to circulate online. The show, titled Inside Out, usually featured low-profile guests from the airline industry, cabin crew, retired pilots, hospitality consultants. But that week, it featured a face the world had already seen too well. Claire Hastings, former Skylux lead flight attendant. Her posture was subdued, the haughty stiffness gone. She sat in front of the mic, eyes clearer than before, voice stripped of its former precision. "I've been thinking about everything that happened," she said quietly. "And I've come to accept something I didn't want to admit." She took a long breath. It wasn't just unconscious bias. It was pride. It was entitlement. It was the belief that because someone didn't fit the image I had in my head, they didn't belong. And that belief cost me everything. The host leaned forward. "If you could say one thing to Olivia Brooks now, what would it be?" Claire hesitated, her throat working as she swallowed. "Thank you. For not destroying me when you could have. For showing me what power with dignity looks like." She paused, then added with tears in her eyes, "And I hope I never forget the lesson that taught me." Meanwhile, PulseScore's strategic review of Skylux's diversity policies led to sweeping reforms. Anonymous grievance reporting systems, quarterly equity audits, and mandatory unconscious bias training for all crew. A month after the incident, Olivia stood on a stage at the Global Ethics Forum in Zurich, addressing an audience of thousands. Behind her, the screen projected a quote in bold white letters. "Justice doesn't always arrive in fury. Sometimes it arrives in silence, but it leaves thunder behind." She spoke without notes. "What happened to me on that flight wasn't new," she told the room. "What was new was that I had the power to respond differently. And power isn't just about using your voice. It's about choosing when to speak and when to let silence carry the message." Her words struck deeply, not because they were emotional, but because they were undeniable. Weeks later, a young black woman boarded a Skylux flight to Tokyo. She wore a t-shirt that read, "Belonging isn't a privilege. It's a right." As she walked past first class, a flight attendant greeted her warmly and didn't ask for her boarding pass twice. She found her seat. No one questioned her. And somewhere in a quiet office, Olivia Brooks read a brief update on her phone. Skylux stock had stabilized, PulseScore's influence had tripled, and diversity metrics within the airline had surged. She placed the phone down, looked out her window, and smiled, not because she'd won, but because the system had been made just a little better than the one she was forced to walk through. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one. Where are you watching from today? And which moment hit you the hardest? Was it the silent power shift, the public humiliation, or the final reckoning? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every one.